Hi everyone, welcome to this dissection video of the HSIE K-6 syllabus that will be implemented from 2027 in New South Wales schools. So as we know, there's a new curriculum that has been coming through. A lot of the syllabuses have been changing. Some of them are still being worked on. For example, I know in the senior secondary HSIE area, there are some syllabuses that aren't finished yet. So we're lucky that the K-6 one is completed. And it's ready to be implemented in 2027. So those of you who have done units with me before will know that I do dissection videos to sort of walk students through the different parts of the syllabus. Very important to know what is in the syllabus. And we can't possibly teach everything that's in the syllabus in the 8 weeks that we have. That would be really great if we could. But becoming familiar with this very important document is key. And in a lot of the videos that I've shared and recorded, I do talk about my experience as a teacher, where I was not made familiar with the curriculum at all, which seems unbelievable, but it was the case. So I do try to make sure that students have that familiarity with the syllabuses prior to going into teaching. Really, really important. So that's what we're going to do here. So the syllabuses that came before this one are the 2012 for the history K to 10 and the 2015 syllabus for geography, which was K to 10 as well. Now the syllabuses are broken down into K to 6 and then 7 to 10 and then the senior ones, whereas before it's K to 10. So they've kept it together. So again, advantages and disadvantages of both. I'm not going to spend this video talking about what those are. We can talk about those in tutorials if that comes up. But there may be a little bit of a comparative analysis here because there are elements of the 2012 and 2015 syllabuses that I think are really important for you to carry forward, even though they're not necessarily present in here. And it's mostly just information about concepts and skills that are really important in history and geography. So I'm going to go through the different sections of the syllabus, and if you have any questions, please put them up on the discussion forums, the appropriate one in the unit, and we'll answer them for you. All right, so again, a new interesting thing about this syllabus is that it includes both history and geography. A question I often get asked is, does that mean that history and geography are taught together? It's not clear for sure how schools will implement these, but history and geography are still two separate subjects. Some of you may remember SOS, Studies of Society and Environment. Many years ago, were taught they sort of merged history and geography together into this new teaching area. That's not what's happening here. History and geography are still separate. The reason I know that is because they have different outcomes. So you're still assessing students on geography and you're still assessing students on history. So that's how I know that. Again, there could be some integration in schools. There are a lot of opportunities for it. As you look through the syllabus, you'll see that there's opportunities to teach geography and history and a little bit of history in geography. So again, how schools implement that will be up to them. So the one thing I'll say just before we move on is that you can access this syllabus online, whereas before the syllabuses were printed out and sent out to people. But now you access it online. The good thing about this, I've been told by Nessa, is that they can provide updates continuously. So if you've got the printed copy, then checking it online could be a little bit different from the one that you have that's printed. So the good thing about having the digital version is that you're consistently looking at the most updated version. So this is a downloaded one, but there shouldn't be too many changes at this point. So the first part of the syllabus sort of explains what's happening in this space. So 2025 and 2026 are really about planning and preparing, and that's what we're doing here in the units. 2027, we're actually going to be using the new syllabuses in schools. So just an overview here. We basically have in K to 6 4 units in geography and 4 units in history. Quite different from what we had in the previous versions where there were 2 units each. And by each, I mean for each stage, except for early stage 1. So stages 1, 2, and 3 had 2 units, which meant that in year 1 you were taught a unit, year 2 you were taught a different unit in stage 1. Then you went on to stage 2, and there were 2 units that had to be taught over those 2 years. Some schools would have one over the first and then have the other one second, and some schools switched it around. It didn't really matter as long as by the end of each stage you had studied those 2 units. Now it's 1 unit. So that means that schools will be responsible for breaking down those units of work into 2 different year levels. Or some schools might be choosing the option of teaching that whole unit of geography in stage 1 and then the whole unit of history in stage 1 for the next year. It's going to be up to schools to decide. I've seen both. So there are benefits to both of those. Quite a big gap between, for example, doing geography in year 1 and then not until year 3. There's quite a big gap. Thinking about skill development, is that problematic? Could be. The advantage, I suppose, of having teaching geography for 1 year and then not the other is that if there's limited time on the timetable, which we know happens with HSIE, it can sort of keep that continuum for the entire year. So there's benefits to both. The big gap or long period of time focusing on one subject. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. So as we go through these, just remember that the 4 units of work are for 2 year levels, except for early stage 1, which is exactly the same. So you can go through this and have a read through. I won't go through all these different parts. There is one section that's, I'll go through this as we look through the outcomes. There is an outcome that is related to creating written text. So you can see a little bit of integration there with English and literacy. And so that's going to be an outcome that is related to skills of literacy, but within the context of HSIE. We'll look at that more closely shortly. Oh, you can see that here. Okay, so you can see that here. So the outcome is assessed in stage 3. So we'll have a look at that. You won't see it in early stage 1, 1 or 2, but you'll see it in stage 3. So it's sort of like you're building the capacity for students to be able to achieve that outcome by stage 3. So you can see that continuum, which is quite nice as well. The integration, which I think teachers were always sort of doing, but having that outcome linked to previous learning is really quite good. All right, so let's have a think about what HSIE is. So you remember from the previous versions of the syllabuses, if you've had a chance to look at them, either because it's required in the unit that you're currently taking or because just out of curiosity, which isn't a bad idea, you'll notice that the rationale for history was focused on history, of course, and the one for geography was focused on geography. But here again, it's merged. So what is HSIE all about? And the units that I teach, we often start with that broad banner of HSIE. What underpins our subjects? What makes history and geography similar? What sort of topics underpin both of those key learning areas that can sort of bring them together? So that's what's happening here in the syllabus. So that's what we're going to be looking at here is the rationale for HSIE. So it incorporates the study of people, places, and environments, as well as how people and events from the past have shaped societies over time. So through the foundational knowledge, understanding, and skills of geography and history, HSIE introduces students to the complex interconnection between peoples and places, the past and the present, so that they can become active, confident, engaged, and valued members of Australia's diverse community. So if you look at the previous 2 syllabuses for history and geography, 2012, 2015, you can see that the aim, which we'll look at in a moment, it comes from or is very much similar to this paragraph here. The idea of becoming active and informed citizens and the skills, interconnections between people and places, past and the present. So I won't read through all of this here, just pull out some general points from each of these paragraphs. It states here that the HSIE syllabus acts as a mirror to reflect the student's personal experiences and a window through which to view the world at different times and places. What a great sentence to really encompass what HSIE is all about. So it tells you a little bit in that paragraph about the ways in which this occurs in the syllabus and the teaching that occurs. And then a paragraph focused on Aboriginal cultures and histories, which you will notice takes up big proportion of the syllabus this time. Whereas the last time, the two syllabuses, we sort of saw it trickling through. There were no outcomes from memory necessarily related to Aboriginal cultures and histories, but again, it sort of seemed very tokenistic and it was just sort of chucked in here and there. And then it sort of finishes off with what it helps students to do by learning the subject. So in the units of work that you're studying here at UNE in the EDSS units, you're really have been thinking a lot about what HSIE is all about and what we are really teaching students. The values, perspectives, and all these different topics and content areas that we've looked at. So here we go, looking at the aim. So the aim of this syllabus is for students to develop what? Four main things. Knowledge and understanding of Aboriginal cultures and histories. There it is, first and up front. So it's very important and very apparent throughout the syllabus. Very important too, geographical and historical knowledge, understanding, and skills. So that's what we're teaching in HSIE, knowledge and understanding, and skills. And here's a new element to the syllabus as well, sort of. I mean, it was there in the previous syllabuses, but maybe not so apparent. Knowledge and understanding of Australia's democracy to become active and informed members of their community. A sense of belonging, awe, and wonder about their world in the past, words that have been taken from the 2012 and 2015 syllabuses. So a lot of synergies there between the previous syllabuses and this one here, and some new elements as well. The democracy sort of focus, even though it was sort of there in the content, and definitely the Aboriginal culture and histories. All right, looking at the outcomes here. If you had a chance to look at the other syllabus, and it's okay if you didn't, if you're just watching this for this one here, the previous syllabuses had a lot of outcomes for each of the different stages. So we've got here history and geography present on this page. Just make it a bit smaller so you can see it. This is telling us here the different unit names. So remember that box of 8 different squares that I showed you? Those are the titles of the units, again for history. So people have lived in the past, that's the early stage 1 unit, and stage 1, this is the unit, and so forth. For each of the units of work, so remembering in the previous syllabuses there were 2 units of work for each stage, there were many outcomes, maybe up to 5 or 6. And when students got to high school, there were definitely 6. And there was one attributed outcome related just to skills because we wanted to focus on knowledge and understanding. You'll notice here that there aren't any outcomes related to skill development. That doesn't mean that students don't develop skills. So you can take that how you like. Maybe that's a good thing, but there's no specific outcome related to skill development. I would suggest that that's probably embedded within these outcomes here. We'll have a look through the different units and we can see where some of that skill development's coming through. Anyways, okay, so looking at geography here first, as I said, these are the 4 units of work. Early stage 1, there are 2 outcomes, and stage 1, 2, and 3. So 2 for each. We'll look at history again in a second. It's a little bit different. This outcome here is telling you that this E here is early stage 1, and HS means HSIE, so you can see the HS is all throughout to differentiate from, say, English, maths, etc. But the E tells us that it's early stage 1. This here tells us that it's Aboriginal, the Aboriginal cultures, histories, focus, outcome, and that goes for each of these. Now, looking at the next one, there's an additional outcome. So the content in geography isn't just about Aboriginal peoples' histories and cultures. There's other content areas that students need to learn. So for example, in early stage 1, students are also identifying and locating places that people connect with using geographical information. So I can tell you right now that within that outcome, geographical skills are important because in order to be able to identify and locate, students are going to have learned some type of geographical skill in order to access that information. So if you're new in the field, you may not know that. But as you become more familiar with geography, then you will. Moving on to the next one, we can see the little one here. That's telling us this is stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. Again, ACH is the Aboriginal people focus, and then the additional geography outcome. So what's the geography outcome for stage 1? Describing the ways people connect to and care for places, water, environments, and each other using geographical information. So there's that skill sort of focus, I think, being embedded there. And you remember that connection and care to places and environments has always been an important component of geography, even in the 2015 syllabus. And that's where those values sort of come through. Continuing on, looking at stage 2, so again, we've got the Aboriginal focus. The other outcome is explaining how people care for Australia's environment and participate in society. Again, using geographical information. Same thing for stage 3. The first one being the Aboriginal knowledges and practices that care for country and the importance of Aboriginal languages revival. That's the outcome for that one. And then a geography focus examines global citizenship and how people organize, protect, and sustainably use the environment using geographical information. Moving on to history, a little bit more here. We were talking about the additional outcomes. This is where they're situated. In history, again, we've got the 4 units of work, which we'll look at a little bit more deeply shortly. Again, the E, the 1, the 2, the 3, indicating what stage we're looking at. The ACH, indicating that we're looking at the Aboriginal peoples, country, culture, etc. And then looking down here, we've got HIS to indicate history. And so we've got different outcomes. So let's look at these 4 outcomes here. In early stage 1, identifying information about daily life and transport in the past using stories, images, and objects. Stage 1, describing the ancient past and changes in communication over time using stories, images, objects, and sites as evidence. So you can see a little bit of the ways in which skills are coming through there, similar to how we identified it with the geography. Students are going to be using different things. So they've mentioned here stories, images, objects, and sites as evidence. In order to be able to use something as evidence in history, you need to be able to research, which we know is a historical skill. We also know that analysis and use of sources is very important, so that's going to be a part of that. So that's still here, trickling through. Perspectives is still an important skill that students need to be able to identify different points of view. And all the other skills that we looked at in the 2012 version of the history syllabus, the K-10, which if you're watching this video in 2027, I will still be bringing in that table because it's important for you as history and geography teachers to know what those historical and geographical skills are. Not necessarily shared here in this syllabus. It's sort of expected that teachers know. So that's why I'll be bringing that information in. But all of these things can't be done unless you have those historical skills. Moving on to stage 2, explaining how people lived in the past, how navigation connected the world, and what life was like in the Sydney Cove penal settlement using sources as evidence. So again, using sources as evidence. And stage 3, examining and describing the development of Australian colonies and Australia as a nation using sources as evidence. So those are the 4 outcomes across early stage 1 to stage 3. And they sit outside the Aboriginal focus outcomes. So there are 2 additional outcomes, which I sort of mentioned earlier on in this video, which were clear in the aim, I believe it was, or I mentioned that there were a couple of new things sort of focused on, or at least highlighted as an outcome. So in history, there's a new outcome for stage 3, describing the origins and features of Australia's democratic system of government and laws. So that was taught in the 2012 syllabus, but here it is much more pronounced. So there's actually an outcome attributed to it. And also that integration with literacy. So students need to be able to create written texts, which they do in English, in literacy, to communicate ideas, but it's going to be about understanding people, places, and events of the past and the present. So that's coded against HSIE, CWT meaning creating written texts, and DEM meaning democracy. Now, as you go through each of these different stages, so when you look at the different units of work, if you're not sure which subject you're looking at, because sometimes the language can be quite similar, well, we know this one's geography because we've got that geo outcome. So just look at the outcomes if you're not too sure. So again, there's 2 for each of these. Remembering that in stage 3, there are 4. So early stage 1, people are connected to places, only 1 unit of work. So it's not necessarily organized in a coherent way, as in teachers can decide, schools can decide how to put this into a unit of work. So we've got the Aboriginal focus here, but there may, the start of the unit may be on identifying natural features of familiar places. And then you could lead in with the Aboriginal focus. So then there's the content areas. They give a lot of examples of things that you can look at, but not necessarily required. So for example, looking at identifying the traditional custodians in Aboriginal country where the school is located using images. Examples could be community signs, acknowledgement of country signs within the school, or anything else. So it's sort of a little bit more open, whereas in the previous syllabuses, it's more prescribed. Moving on to the next one, which is, again, early stage 1. How do I know that? If I don't remember the name of the unit, we've got the E here and also history here. Again, the topics here are looking at, they have the Aboriginal focus, and then also the ways in which that students are going to be using these images to show changes over time. And this is where the analysis really comes through. So responding to a stimulus about an object, so that's where you're going to be teaching that analysis of sources, identifying similarities between objects from the past and the present, and also things that are different. So that's analysis right there, is similarities and differences, and listening to your viewing texts in the about life in the past. Again, up to schools to decide how to put these units of work together. Now, you'll remember me mentioning that there is that create written text outcome that is assessed in stage 3. So you're still teaching that in stages 1 and 2 as well, early stage 1 and 2. So you'll notice here that at the end that students are creating written simple sentences that supports understanding of the past, that connection between literacy and history. And how do you do that? Using time connectives to describe and sequence information events, using prepositional phrases to indicate time or place. So in the past, I did this, or last year I was doing this. Using tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary to describe changes to daily life and transport over time, and creating simple sentences. So at the end of the unit of work, it'll show you that connection to that outcome that needs to be assessed in stage 3. All right, moving on to stage 1. A little bit more closely at this one here. So we've got geography, content. What is it? Aboriginal peoples have a responsibility to country. So looking at these blue sections first. People show their connection to places using geographical information. People care for Australia's water environments. And people engage in active citizenship by working together to care for places and each other. So there are basically 4 different sections here in this stage. So again, this could be taught over 2 years and broken up, or it could be taught in 1 year, and then they don't address geography again until 2 years later. So how will this be broken up? It's to be seen in schools. It's There's a lot of ways it could be done, really. Yeah, you could even focus on probably people show their connection to places using geographical information, that skill development being right there for sure, and maybe the Aboriginal focus in a unit of work, and then bringing in the Australia's water environment, the care for Australia's water environment, and then engaging in active citizenship by working together to care for places and each other. So, or there could be elements of each brought in. So you might do say that you're teaching it over 2 different years, you might break this up, these 4 different sections, into a unit of work and then build on it in the next year. That's an idea that could happen as well. Moving on to Stage 1 history. So people learn about the past by engaging with stories, images, objects, and sites. Again, we have those 2 outcomes. What are the 4 sections we have here? Aboriginal people have rich and diverse cultures and histories. People use stories, images, objects, and sites to understand the ancient past. We've got that ancient past element coming through. The way people communicate has changed over time. And here we go, sequencing ideas in written text supporting understanding of the past. So we've got that creating written text element and what that should look like in history. So how will this be broken up? Again, same as before, it could be in diverse ways. Just remembering that by the end of this stage, and this goes for each of the different stages, these outcomes need to be assessed in some sort of product. Okay, moving on to stage 2 for geography. So geographical information is used to understand the world. Again, 2 outcomes here. What are the content areas? The Aboriginal focus, the content area. People use geographical information to understand climates and environments. And people have responsibility to care for Australia's environments. And people participate in Australian society through active citizenship. Looking at the outcomes, you can really see how this can be assessed. There's quite a bit of information that students need to learn in order to be able to um, be assessed on these outcomes. But you can see how they've written the outcomes in such a way that all of this content can sort of support the learning that students will need to have in order to be assessed on these outcomes. So there's quite a lot here, but they all fit nicely within the 2 outcomes. And looking at history, stage 2, same sort of thing. The Aboriginal focus is always seems to be at the top here. Sources provide evidence of how people lived in the past. Navigation to connect with other places. That's that geography sort of maybe connection that you could bring in there, looking at maybe the journeys on a map. Sources provide evidence of how people lived in the first penal settlement at Sydney Cove. And then there's that connecting ideas in written text. I'm going to come back to these in a second. I'm just going to talk about skills in a moment, but I'll just leave that off to the side for a second. So stage 3, geographical information is used to plan for sustainable futures. 2 outcomes, Aboriginal focus to start. Then we have people organize and manage places using geographical information. People can protect global environments and use sustainable practices for the future. And that's it for that one. Oh, sorry, people of Australia are global citizens. Now, I haven't gone through all the dot points that are under each of the blue sections. That's for us to do in the tutorials, part of the assignments, and also, um, something that you can look through yourself as well to become familiar with what you need to know. But you get an idea of how it's sort of broken down. And the main takeaway from this video is to understand that there's 1 unit of work for each stage. There are 2 outcomes for each stage, except for stage 3, for example, history, where we've got the 4. Okay, actually, I didn't go through that one yet. And that the units are units of work are presented here in such a way that there's more option for teachers to sort of create a unit of work that's relevant maybe for their school or their local area. And there are a lot of options. So whereas the previous syllabuses, 2012 and 2015, sort of prescribed the order in which you taught the content. So there's more agency, I suppose, in how we teach history and geography. Could argue that that's a good thing, maybe not a good thing. But we won't spend the video talking about the good and bad of that necessarily. Just before we move on, I want to show you the history unit for stage 3. So again, as I mentioned, there's 4 outcomes here, the democracy and the creating written texts. Again, alongside the Aboriginal focus outcome and the stage 3 specific history outcome. Aboriginal peoples have diverse languages. That's the focus for stage 3. Sources show perspectives on how people established colonies in Australia. People have developed Australia as a nation, and people in Australia have democratic roles and responsibilities. So that's where that democracy is coming through, and also that creating written texts. So you'll find those sections of creating written texts in the history units of work, remembering that at the end. Now, the one thing that I wanted to mention was about the skills. So if you've had a look at the 2012-2015 syllabuses, you'll remember that table where we have the list of different historical skills and also the geographical inquiry skills as well. That's not necessarily really present here in the new syllabus, but it is very important anyways. How do we know where to teach skills? I think it is a bit disappointing that it's not as explicit as the 2012-2015 syllabuses about the skills being taught and maybe about what they are. It's sort of hoped in ways that teachers will be able to figure that out. But what I will say for the history components, whenever you see anything about evidence or sources, this is where the historical skills are going to be coming through. In a lot of ways, all of the content you're going to be accessing, students are going to be accessing that knowledge and understanding through some type of historical skill. So whether that be research, analysis and use of sources, or whatever, these different skills are still very important in teaching. I'll just show you here, even though this is the 2012 syllabus, I'll still be looking at this for years to come because I still believe it's really important. So these skills here are still very important in history. So for example, understanding chronology, the different terms and concepts in history, analysis and use of sources, being able to interpret evidence and provide an understanding of point of view, perspectives, empathetic understanding, that sort of is now been merged with perspectives. So you're sort of learning about empathetic understanding by being able to understand other people's point of view. And also research and explanation and communication is that creating written texts. But these historical skills are very important. So research is not necessarily only a historical skill. Research is something that is involved in many different teaching areas. But I think what is clear here is that each of these different skills involve the use of some form of evidence and a source that is being used in order to gather that evidence and what that means. So don't forget that these are still very important. And as we look at the current syllabus, you're looking for example, here, where this one is stage 3, show sources, show perspectives. There's skills right there. So analysis and use of sources, looking at point of view. So that hasn't changed. Let's have a look through another history unit of work. I believe, okay, this is stage 2. Sources provide evidence. That's historical skills there. You're going to be teaching students analysis and use of sources to identify indigenous or agricultural practices, to examine cultural works. So they'll be looking at some type of evidence, some type of source that will tell them something about something in the past. Identify and describe objects. This is all source analysis. Okay, so we haven't lost the historical skills. It's in there. You just have to sort of find it and know that you're teaching it across the units of work. We'll look at one more. It's geography. Looking at history here. So people are using stories, images, and so forth to understand the past. How do you do that? By analyzing them, researching, the identification and describing, the comparison of ancient objects. That's all analysis. So you'll be teaching that. So in some ways, it's probably better in this syllabus because it's explaining where you need to be teaching the sources and in what content areas. Whereas the previous syllabus, there was a table, and you were sort of looking at the content and finding opportunities to teach the historical skills. So, you could hold on to the table that we just had a look at here and just remembering these skills that they're very important in history. But at least the syllabus now is sort of supporting where that can be actioned. The other thing I'll just mention is the concepts. These are still very much a part of history, even though we don't have this table in the new syllabus. So continuity and change is very much a part of history, cause and effect, perspectives, empathetic understanding, significance, and contestability. Very important in history. Now, looking at geography, looking at the 2015 syllabus, we know that the skills are where students have to acquire geographical information, so gather some sort of data, process it, and then communicate it to the teacher through some sort of product. So if we have a look at the current syllabus, sorry, the 2027 syllabus, looking at geography, I think this language is really important, using geographical information. So there are different ways to be using it. It's either going to be through acquiring it, processing it, and then also communicating it. That's going to be those three elements of geography are still very important in the syllabus. You still need to be able to work with geographical data, whatever that is. So for example, looking at physical maps, that's geographical information. It's data. Students are describing the features of urban, rural, remote places by comparing images. So that is processing information. So if you're looking at a physical map of one country and a physical map of the other, you need to do a comparative analysis. You've got the data and you're processing that information. So that's still what you're doing here. You're communicating that, or you're drawing conclusions based on the interpretation of the geographical information. You're still doing all these different things. It's still very important here. Okay, so going down, describing the unique features. This is all about data collection, the compare and contrast. That's the processing analysis, that middle section on the table that I just showed you. And going on to the next unit of work, looking at geography, use geographical information. People have responsibility to care for Australia's environments. So observing and describing the way people organize places into spaces for different purposes. So they'll be using some sort of data in order to, or when you observe something, you're gathering some sort of data because then you have to describe it. So you're looking at something, some sort of source, and being able to describe that information. So that's all still happening. We're still having students acquire data. They are still making observations. They are still recording geographical data information, and so I'm representing that data on a table or graph, maps, and so forth. So all these different skills are still happening, but they're just not explicit in the new syllabus. So you might want to keep a handle on this table as well. So going through, you can see where different geographical skills are evident. Let's look at one more unit of work in stage 3. Again, using geographical information. So locating, representing, and explaining. That's gathering, processing, communicating. That's all skill-based. Observing, that's acquiring geographical data. Measuring, collecting, recording. There, we're seeing all those words again that are basically the same thing as what we've looked at here, acquiring, processing, communicating. It's all linked. So in geography, one other thing to remember is that we have geographical concepts. These are still very important in teaching geography. So place, space, environment, interconnection, scale, sustainability, and change. So if you're not sure what those are, become very familiar with them because while you are teaching geography, you will be teaching these concepts. So very important and still a part of the new syllabus. Okay, so one more thing I wanted to mention is, or to draw attention to, is the geographical tools continuum. So in the 2015 version of the syllabus, we know that we have this great table which displays all of the different geographical tools that must be taught across a stage. It was up to teachers to decide which units of work and which content areas would best suit these different geographical tools. The good thing about the 2015 syllabus was that each of these had codes, for example, GS, ST for spatial technologies, and so forth. And when you went to the units of work, there were suggestions. So for example, we've got GS here, VR. NESA was telling us these are opportunities to incorporate these tools. So it was sort of giving us some guidance, I suppose, in that way. What does it look like coming up? Well, let's look at, we don't have the table anymore. So we do need to keep in mind what the geographical tools are, remembering how they can be used in lessons and in what ways they can help to build on the knowledge and understanding of geography. So let's go to a unit of work in geography. I will skip down to stage 2. Okay, so remembering we have using geographical information. So in a way that's sort of implying that use of geographical tools. Let's have a look here and see if there's any mention of the tools that I showed in the table. Identifying and comparing climate zones. It's implied that some type of map is required for that type of comparative analysis. Comparing seasonal rainfall, you'd have to have some type of graph. So it's not actually telling you that this is where you would use a graph. You sort of need to figure that out. This one here tells us using grid and relief maps, so it's quite specific there. That's good. Um, Conducting surveys and graph results to explain how and why people respond to the needs of the community. So again, thinking of the skills, those 3 different ones, acquiring, processing, communicating, you can see how the geographical tools are being used in order to be able to proceed through those different skills. Acquiring, conducting surveys, so you're gathering data, and graph results, so turning those survey results into some sort of graph, and then communicating that information and explaining it to the teacher through some sort of product. Let's have a look at one more unit of work. Let's look at stage 3 to see how explicit it is about the tools. Um, okay, locating and representing cities using road maps. So it's telling you what type of maps, using satellite imagery. Now, I think that was one that was often, probably not used often in the classroom, but probably more so in recent times. Obviously, with the, digital technologies changing. Freight maps, so it's a little bit explicit there about what you need to use. Aerial images. Here we go. Using choropleth maps and climate graphs, so specific types of graphs there to show the relationship between climates and vegetation zones. So I think in a lot of ways, the 2027 syllabus is quite good because it shows you when you have to use it in different content areas and where it's appropriate. But it is important to, I believe, keep in mind the geographical tools table here. Maybe even, reading through in the 2015 version what these all mean. So what are maps? What types of maps? There's a big list here. Field work. What is field work? And how is it important in geography? Very important, very much a part of what we do in geography. Um, Graphs and statistics, what does that mean? What are you doing with graphs and statistics? Spatial technologies, visual representations. So that is the main takeaway from there that I wanted to show you, that the tools are still there, but becoming familiar with all the different types is really important. Okay, so after you look through the units of work, I believe we come to the end. There's more information on the New South Wales NESA website. They're updating information all the time, and that can be really helpful, especially for assessment support. There's a lot of teacher information support as well. I believe I put some in the different units, but that's being updated again all the time in digital form. So definitely go on the website and keep up to date with all those different changes. So I hope that this video has helped sort of walk you through the start of the syllabus to the end. We looked at the different units of work for both history and geography. We've talked about why it's in one syllabus instead of two now, and what that means and what that could look like in schools. We've gone through some of the content in the different units of work. We've identified the outcomes across early stage 1 to stage 3, noting that in history there are 4 outcomes instead of 2. And we've sort of had a look through history and geography to identify opportunities for teaching skills, historical or geographical skills, and also what sort of words to be looking for when we're thinking about skills. And also, I sort of linked back to, which I said I wouldn't do too much, but I had to a little bit here, was look at the concepts and the skills for each of the 2 teaching areas. So I'm hoping this video has helped you understand a little bit more about the syllabus. Again, we can't teach every content area in the syllabus. Would be great if we could, but it would take a lot longer than 1 trimester for sure. So it's important for you to become familiar with the content that you'll need to teach. But I think having this awareness of what is up and coming in the syllabus when you go into schools is really, really important. Probably the most important thing that you can take away from this unit. I probably say that about a lot of things, but I think everything's important. So, all right, thanks everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the syllabus dissection video for HSIE. Bye everyone.